Well, I think everyone in the royal family is hoping that we've heard the last of the Andrew allegations. Of course, you know, if the Epstein files are made completely public and this sort of drip feeding ends, then you could be in for a deluge, right?
Because Andrew clearly didn't tell the full truth to his mother, the late Queen. He didn't tell the full truth to the King, which is why this was allowed to go on for so long.
It's a very clear indication from the public they've had enough.
I never really understand what all this stuff fuss is about anyway, because Harry is on the outside.
On Harry's relationship with the King, you had a very interesting new insight into about what actually happened during his very brief meeting with the King early last year.
I think that the problem we've got with William and Harry is not only distance. I don't see there really being any common ground at the moment, but it would be a shame for William going forward if his reign, you know, through the media and everything was defined by this relationship breakdown with his brother. In that respect, it may be better for them to try to find some sort of common ground.
Hello, I'm Bronte Coy. Welcome to Royal Exclusive, where this week Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor broke cover for the very first time since being stripped of his royal titles. The Princess of Wales has given her first speech since being diagnosed with cancer. Another recollections may vary scenario appears to have flared up with Prince Harry, and there are fresh insights from behind palace walls thanks to a new royal book. Yes, lots to discuss as always, and joining me in the studio to do just that is royal journalist and author Robert Jobson and Vanity Fair's royal correspondent Katie Nicholl. Thank you so much for being here. Andrew has been photographed riding around Royal Lodge, and this is the first time we've seen him in about 7 weeks. Katie, Andrew has been laying low these past 2 months, but his name has stayed in the headlines. One of the latest updates is an email between Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell, in which Maxwell appears to confirm that Andrew had had a, quote, massage at her London home. Have we heard the worst of the Andrew allegations, or is this drip feeding just going to continue?
Well, I think everyone in the royal family is hoping that we've heard the last of the Andrew allegations. Of course, you know, if the Epstein files are made completely public and this sort of drip feeding ends, then you could be in for a deluge, right? We don't really know. And I think what's been so extraordinary about this story is it's a bit like it's had a boomerang effect, right? It keeps coming back just when you think it's stopped. And it comes back in the most extraordinary and, for Andrew, catastrophic ways. So I think, don't hold your breath. There could very possibly be more. And in terms of being out riding in Windsor, well, I guess, you know, the former Prince Andrew, now just Andrew, is trying to get in as many horse rides as he can before he has to pack up and leave Windsor. And as we know, you know, he's always taken great joy from riding. We've often seen him out with the late Queen's groom, often out horse riding together. And of course, that's something that's not going to happen in his new life.
I should have said, yes, his soon-to-be former royal home. So, Rob, you trace the fallout of Andrew's Epstein scandal in your new book, which we will discuss in depth later on. But you know Sarah Ferguson, and she is still in Royal Lodge for the time being with Andrew. How are they both holding up at the moment, from what you know?
Not very well, I don't think. I think even members of the royal family have taken the action. They're concerned about both their mental health. I mean, I think that most of all, you've got to be concerned about the victims of the Epstein scandal, and that, to me, is the biggest worry. But yeah, look, they're human beings. A lot has been taken away. They're pretty much, in Andrew's case, his entire life has been completely turned upside down. So, you know, I don't have any sympathy for him, but yeah, I think they're both struggling mentally. I think really also the other thing is, you know, they've been living together in this sort of strange situation for some time now. That's all going to end by the sound of it. And it does sound as if Sarah, yes, who took money from Epstein after the event, you know, is looking at this, and there's a sense that, does she believe Andrew anymore? Doesn't really look like it, because he's been found out as a proven liar. So there's all that to contend with as well. You know, at the end of the day, I think that we shouldn't necessarily be judging them both at the same level. I think Prince Andrew, as he was, really has to take most of the blame. But a lot of people have been turning on her as well. And I think, to be honest, I'm not sure that is necessarily as justified, in my opinion. He may well have been very convincing in the lies that he told not only his mother, that he told his brother, the king, and he also may have told her. So, look, I think, yes, she took money from Epstein afterwards, and she knew who he was and what he was when she did it. And that's an error that she'll have to live with.
It's interesting you've brought up their dynamic, because I think this is something that a lot of people have wondered, because we found out after living together for so long, and she's previously described them as the happiest divorced couple in the world. Obviously, it looks like they're going to be living separately, but does that mean that their relationship is actually fracturing now as well, or is it just a logistic situation?
You get a sense that possibly that'll be the case. The reality is, everyone talks about Sarah. She didn't get the multi-million-pound. They elevated her as this, royal princess, the Duchess of York. She came into the family. She was given all this expectation of a lifestyle. She didn't get a massive divorce payment. She really didn't, and then left in this world really of debt, continuous. So I don't really have a massive amount of sympathy for her, but I do think that she shouldn't be necessarily pushed into the same level of guilt and criticism as Andrew, because Andrew clearly, he clearly didn't tell the full truth to his mother, the late Queen. He didn't tell the full truth to the King. This is why this was allowed to go on for so long. Perhaps if he had said the truth very early on, a lot of people would have had different judgments and different things would have happened.
And speaking of from earlier, the drip feeding of developments in this case, Katie, members of Congress in the US have recently sent a letter calling on Andrew to finally explain his, quote, long-standing friendship with Epstein in a deposition in the interest of justice for the victims. He's under no legal obligation to do so, and I believe we're about to pass the deadline, so it's looking extremely unlikely that he will participate in this. But should he?
I think he absolutely should. Will he? Absolutely not. He's under no legal obligation to do so. That would potentially open up a new can of worms, and he obviously doesn't want to put himself in that situation. The other question to ask is, might he face any sort of formal questioning over here? We were hearing rumblings of a possible investigation into those allegations that he used his personal protection officer, taxpayer funded, of course, to dig for dirt on Virginia Giuffre, questionable use of taxpayer funded resources. I suspect he'll avoid any sort of formal questioning, and I think probably that suits Andrew. It probably suits the royal family. The whole idea of putting him into exile in Sandringham, the hope is that way the King can keep an eye on him and contain him somewhat, and that the Andrew problem finally goes away.
I just don't think that, I can't see him living in Sandringham long term. I think that, I do see that as with other disgraced royals like the King and Carlos, I do think he'd probably end up somewhere where some of his friends in, maybe Abu Dhabi, maybe Bahrain, wherever. I just don't see that lifestyle being what he's going to do. Equally, he knows with what this drip feeding of what's coming out, he knows what he's written. He knows what emails he's written, and he was prepared to lie to Emily Maitlis. So now he must know more than anybody what connections and what things he did after 2008, 2010 with Epstein. He must have a knowledge of that because he did it. And as Katie says, there's no way he's going to give any more evidence to anybody because it's only going to leave him even more exposed. Should he do it? Absolutely, he should do it. If he continues to say he has no guilt and he hasn't done anything wrong, then he should just go and show that he hasn't done anything wrong. No one's saying he should have to prove his innocence. No one has to prove their innocence. But if he has done nothing wrong, just tell the truth.
You took such an in-depth look in your book, which again we will get to. In your book, though, I know that you look a lot of the crises that the royals have faced over the last 100 years. And knowing now what you know about how they handle these things, and particularly in terms of the King and Prince William, do you think that there's a sense now from them that they've done enough, that line's been drawn in the sand, or do you feel like they're bracing for more reaction down the line?
No, I don't think it's good enough. I think that ultimately, if a crime has been committed, then there has to be justice. And at the moment, there's a sense that if you're rich enough and you've got rich enough people, this man, ultimately, he may be struggling mentally and whatever, we have to be aware of that. But he's not going to be destitute. He's going to have money. He's going to be living in a property, some property will be, which would be, have a roof over his head. If he has done something wrong, then he's escaping justice. And no matter who you are, wherever you are, that doesn't feel right by anybody's standards. But that said, the thing that makes me uncomfortable is we're all judging on information that is not, we haven't got enough information because it's not gone before a court of law, and we haven't tested the evidence of people that are the accusers.
Well, of course, one of them is dead.
But there are
unable to.
But so therefore, we haven't had that ability to do that, and therefore you do feel slightly uncomfortable that is the case. But then what else? I'd like to know what else other people know. I'd like to know what the King knows. I'd like to know what Prince William knows, because they've made clear judgments to change things. And we know the Windsor family are ruthless when it comes to protecting their own brand. But do they know any more? And if they do know more, then we really should be told.
And you've said it there. He has denied any allegations of wrongdoing, but the fallout does continue for him. And there's even things in terms of the public reaction. It's been reported this week that at least 4 plaques in the Falklands bearing Andrew's name have been removed. Of course, he famously fought in the Falklands War and was lauded for his efforts. Do you think the decision to remove these plaques is fair?
I think it's inevitable. Whether it's fair or not, I don't know. I mean, he fought with distinction in the Falklands War. He was lauded by his peers. But the fact is, if you've been involved in this sort of murky world of Epstein, then really a lot of people it's totally justified in saying they want no association with him.
I think it's quite an interesting point just to make, that it's the public distancing themselves from Andrew. Everything we've seen up until now, the formal stripping of his titles, of his patronages, of everything else, I think except for his military medal, right, Rob? Which he has retained.
Yeah, which he should.
Has been taken away at the behest of the King and where possible avoiding Parliament. We know about the letters patent. But when it comes to the public saying, well, we don't want these plaques, we don't want streets named after Andrew, it's a bit like the people of Sussex saying they don't want any affiliation with the Duke and Duchess of Sussex. It's a very clear indication from the public they've had enough.
I think also the palace, you've got to remember that, since the death of the Queen, we've been in a transitional phase, and the monarchy is it's a fragile relationship between public and monarchy. Monarchy is an unelected institution after all. So, that relationship has to be maintained. And I think that this has left a huge stain on the royal family, and they've done their best to distance themselves from him. But you can't distance themselves from the second son of the late Queen. Maybe she didn't do enough. I mean, I know it's difficult to criticise the late Queen, but this was her son, and maybe she looked at the situation with rose-tinted glasses. And even I think some members of the royal family will be saying, well, maybe she didn't do enough.
And you do get the sense that this story is so far from being over. And as you just mentioned, there's thousands of Brits are now furious that they're living on streets that are named after Andrew. So where does it end? They want those changed as well. But yes, as I say, this story is continuing, but for now we will move on because the Princess of Wales has appeared alongside Sir Gareth Southgate at a landmark early years summit this week, and it's part of a push to encourage business leaders to invest in early childhood. Katie, Catherine gave her first public speech in almost 2 years. She's been through a lot in that time, and she spoke quite powerfully.
She did. I mean, I sort of watched her yesterday and was reminded of her very, very first speech. She was opening a hospice up in Norwich, I think it was. And, she's come so far. And you look at the work that she is doing with the early years. William and Kate, Catherine, are now all about legacy work, and she has absolutely poured her heart and soul into the early years, knowing that she will ultimately make a difference to future generations in this country and generations for whom she will be Queen at some point. And I think you've really seen the fruits of that. And of course, having gone through her cancer diagnosis and preventative chemotherapy, she's had a tough couple of years. And has spoken about how much she loves her job. It's taken her a while to get back to work. She's not fully back at work yet. It's very much on her terms. But I think what you're seeing is her cherry picking and doing the most important work. And she did a great job, I thought, at that speech. And she looked incredibly healthy. She looked really happy to be up there. And I think knows that the work that she's doing, this convening work, is really making a difference. And that's what she wants to do. And just to the point about what she was talking about, which was the importance of love. You don't often hear people talking about love in the workplace. It's going to be the theme of her Christmas Carol concert as well. And we've heard the royals talk about love a lot in the last couple of years, and togetherness, and those very personal feelings. And I think that's, Rob's talking about that transition from Queen Elizabeth, this new reign that we're in, and that seems very much to be synonymous with it.
So it was important messaging, but it also needs to be said she looked fantastic doing it.
She did. She looked great. She had a lot of stick earlier in the year, didn't she, about her hair? She'd gone for a very blonde look. Not everyone loved it. I think it's fair to say it was pretty divisive. She's rocking, as we say in America, the pantsuit, and she was looking fabulous in a beautiful trouser suit yesterday. As we know, at the start of the year, she did make a point, quite unusual, to tell Kensington Palace that she didn't want the details of her outfits to be released to the press, which is something, Rob and I as royal reporters depend on. It's part of the copy, what she's wearing. But actually, she wants the attention less on what she's wearing, more on what she's doing and what she's saying. And so that sort of iconic trouser suit, which is very much becoming her look, is a wardrobe now that means business. And we're seeing her re-wearing trouser suits. We're seeing her stick to a mooted palette, so that the focus isn't necessarily on what she's wearing, but what she's doing. And I think it's an important message.
But the message that people will be looking at what she's wearing, and we're talking about. I mean, I remember the years ago when I was in wherever it was, Angola, I think, and the Princess of Wales said exactly the same thing. The last Princess of Wales, Diana, it's not what I'm wearing that matters, it's what I'm doing. And that is true, but equally, they still wanted to know what she was wearing, or these new shoes, or these different jeans. And it's part of the process. I think she really is the glue, really, of the royal family. I think that we're entering a bit of a new era, actually, for the royal family. And yes, the King is very much the lead. And I think he's doing a great job in terms of with the energy levels, given what he's living with cancer and the courage that he's shown. But I do feel, given what we saw with William in Brazil, and Catherine speaking there as she did so well, I think there's a sense really that they are the driving force of a new monarchy going forward. What that looks like, we'll have to wait and see. I mean, I think that it's going to have to be adapting to circumstances around it. But it's certainly going to be different, I think, going forward. I think there'll be less pomp and pageantry and more down-to-earth action, more business, more getting on with business.
And of course, they're part of a much smaller royal team. So to mention one of those that's on sort of the outside of it now, Prince Harry's made headlines again back here in the UK over the weekend, because this is an interesting one, because I thought we had moved past this with the so-called peace summit that we had between Harry's communications team and the King's communications team a little bit earlier this year. But he raised eyebrows. Harry raised eyebrows the day that Prince William landed in Rio for the Earthshot Prize, because it was the same time that he announced he'd be going to Canada, which again just shows that scheduling clash, which we understand had created some tension in the past. So what's happened over the weekend is that the palace sources have told The Times that they had never received any notice, despite Harry's team saying at the time that they had let them know as a courtesy that news was coming. This seems to be a case of recollections may vary once again. And I thought this was in the rearview mirror. So what do we think's going on here?
I mean, they either did it or they didn't. So if the palace is saying they had no notification, then I don't see why they would say that if they had been notified. I never really understand what all this fuss is about anyway, because Harry is on the outside. If he can't necessarily organise his diary just to suit the royal families, no more than when you're trying to do the grid system, other members of the royal family can absolutely fit in. Does it really matter? I think it's more of a puff than anything else. I don't think it really mattered. I don't think people were overly concerned. William got the lion's share of the coverage. Harry didn't really get a lot of coverage, I didn't think, which is inevitable, really.
I suppose that was the ultimate test, was to see then what would happen with the coverage, and I guess no harm, no foul.
I mean, there were 30, 40 journalists covering, William. I don't think there was less than a handful dealing with Harry. So I don't think that it really mattered.
And doesn't it just illustrate, I think, the very different directions that both of those brothers are going? I mean, it was Harry who famously said all those years back that they were on a different path, and never more have they appeared on totally different trajectories. And, I think I look at Harry and I see someone in the vein of absolute celebrity. you know, whether it's award ceremonies.
After the Kardashians party.
The Kardashians. He
Well, then
is
delete the pictures.
essentially in celebrity territory. As Rob says, you know, William doing really important work over in Brazil, standing in for his father, addressing COP30, big pack of journalists following everything he's doing. I mean, this is a future king in the making. Harry feels very much like an afterthought.
Yeah, and also there's photographs, or at least of William on the plane with, you know, his shirt sleeves going through his briefing notes. I just thought there was a touch of the sort of JFK's about it. You know, there was like a new Camelot, really. I just thought that you got a sense that he's stepping up. Yes, I'm not saying that he's treading on his father's shoes, not far from it, but he's definitely embracing and evolving into that role.
And they seem very much in lockstep as well. Those days of rivalry and competition, and there were days of that between Charles and William. I think in many ways the traumas and the scandals that have surrounded the family in recent years have actually solidified these two. They are very much on the same page. They are absolutely aligned.
I think that to a degree, I don't think they are absolutely aligned. I think the king will probably, you know, like any king, he is the number one, and I think that he's got his own ideas. William has been very vocal in some of those ideas that he would do when it comes to his time, and maybe he should probably be a little less vocal on that, because the king, out of respect, is still in position.
Well, I want to get into all of this because you do discuss this in your book. It covers so many major royal flashpoints. We don't have time to talk about all of them, unfortunately, but it is such an interesting read. So your new book, The Windsor Legacy, A Royal Dynasty of Secrets, Scandal and Survival, is out now. So you've covered the royals for so many decades, but in your time researching and speaking to people for this book, what was the biggest shock or surprise for you that you've uncovered?
Well, funny, it was just one particular story. I mean, the actual book covers 100 years since the Queen's birth, and I thought it was a good position because next year issue would have been 100, late Queen Elizabeth. But obviously the major scandals over the years have been huge. But there was one story that jumped out at me, which as a journalist I thought was amazing, was that the Queen Camilla, when she was the Duchess of Cornwall, her staff were taking her jewels to Bryce Norton for a trip to Canada. And they stopped off for a coffee. Two of them went for a coffee. The other one, who was supposed to stay by the car, went off and had a cigarette, leaving the jewellery in the car. And can you imagine this happening? I mean, and then in that time, there was a gang operating in that area, and they stole the jewellery bag. It's like a scene out of the Keystone Cops. And then can you imagine going back to the car and then all the three of them looking at each other saying, what's happened to the jewels?
Someone's getting fired.
So they had to obviously make a call. And then they didn't bring in the police. They brought in intelligence services, and they tracked the gang, and a deal was done where the jewels were returned and nobody was charged. So it was actually that story. I was sort of open-mouthed that sort of thing could happen today. But really, I think...
Did anyone lose their job?
No, they didn't, funny enough. And I know the three names of the people that were were there. I don't suppose they'll be stopping off for coffee anytime soon. But there was a number of bigger issues. I think that there was a recurring theme of the problem of the spare. That did seem to come through, you know, from the moment when you've got the issue of obviously the biggest thing that's hit the royal family in 100 years has been the abdication crisis. Much bigger than anything else. I think Mencken described it as the biggest story since the birth of Christ. So, you know, it was at the time when it was being written about, you know, when things were being blocked. So the abdication crisis, obviously, you know, and how the spare had to step up, i.e. somebody, George VI, who was not prepared for the role, all the way through, you know, from Princess Margaret and her problems with Townsend and the issues that arose there, and the fact that she couldn't marry the man that she loved, all the way through to, you know, Andrew and now Harry. There seems to be a recurring problem that they hopefully will try to resolve before George and Charlotte are too much older.
I think there surely have been some key lessons learned in the last 5 or 6 years, maybe, you'd hope. So you delve into the relationship, as we mentioned before, between William and the King. So a lot of people are interested in this because it does feel like it's the two of them now against, you know, there's a very, very small group of senior royals. So are they close, or what's that dynamic like?
No, Katie's right. Of course, they've realised in the last 18 months or so that they have to be, if you like, singing from the same hymn sheet. But that doesn't mean they necessarily have been close over the years. I mean, there's no doubt that Harry was very much more in tune with Charles, and Charles used to get on better with him. And sometimes William can be a little difficult. But there were issues over whether or not he should fly the helicopter with his family in it, and that led to rows between not only the late Queen but with Charles, saying you just can't do this. But he continues to do it. Issues over the Royal Collection, Ivory Collection and the Royal Collection, all sort of areas, he doesn't want to wear a kilt, things like this. All of these things, little tiny things that any friction may happen in any family, but I think essentially they realise that they may not necessarily have the same vision going forward, but the King, at 77 realises that his time, whatever it is going to be, he's not going to have a long reign, and that it's really the future is William's more than anything else. And I think in that respect, there's sort of a sense of, passing on the baton, even if, I think the King probably feels, from what I understand, that it's good to appeal to new people that don't necessarily support the institution, but don't forget the people that do support the institution and the traditions and the way things are done. Don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. It's all good appealing to a new electorate, if you like, but at the same time, remember the ones that are why the people like the royal family as it is.
Very delicate balancing act. And on Harry's relationship with the King, you write about that as well. And you had a very interesting new insight into about what actually happened during his very brief meeting with the King early last year, right after that cancer diagnosis was made public. You've written that the King may have told him a little white lie.
Well, it wasn't. I mean, I don't suppose you could say it was a white lie, really, because I wouldn't necessarily want to accuse the King of that. But the fact is, what happened was the King had telephoned Harry, and Harry had taken it upon himself to come over to Britain, which I think most children would think is fair, and you can understand his desire to do so. But at that time, I think the King was quite tired. He'd just been given the diagnosis, was on quite a new regime of treatment, and I think he arranged. I know that what happened when they agreed to see his son, but didn't want to, after the initial meeting, go on and on, because he was quite tired. He wanted to go back to St Sandringham, and he arranged for somebody to come in and say there was a procedure that the King had to have. He didn't actually have to have a procedure. He had to get on a helicopter to go to Sandringham, but it meant that the meeting was cut down. And so if it had strayed into areas that were pretty wary, at that time, I don't think the King was particularly keen to be discussing money, the problems with his brother, other issues. It could just be a meeting to say, the father and son to get together.
And of course, in fairness, exactly as you said, the King had a lot on his plate at that time.
He just wanted a rest, I think.
Yes. And lastly on that, what about William and Harry? There's been so much made of Harry's attempts to reconnect with the UK in a number of ways this year, particularly with his dad. But what about William? What does their relationship look like 5-10 years from now? Is there a reunion?
I personally don't see it, but I mean, one can live in hope. I think that one thing that we've seen through history, we saw with George VI and his brother when, after Edward VIII had said that he was quitting, was abdicating, but he swears his allegiance to his brother. We saw that he didn't really, and he nicked millions of pounds effectively from the royal coffers, and that really did cause a friction between the two brothers that never ever healed. And I think that the problem we've got with William and Harry is not only distance, because it's very hard to build rebuild a relationship when one's so far away, and then the visits are so intermittent. I don't see there really being any common ground at the moment. But it would be a shame for William going forward if his reign, through the media and everything, was defined by this relationship breakdown with his brother. In that respect, it may be better for them to try to find some sort of common ground, but I don't really see it myself.
So as I mentioned, The Windsor Legacy, your new book, is out now. So thank you so much for giving us a little bit of an insight into that. And thank you both so much for such a great conversation. Before I let you go, though, we have to do our quick fire questions. Oh. So just quick answers, whatever comes to you first. The King, amid all this other news, the King celebrated his 77th birthday this week, and he was given a cake in the shape of a Welsh castle, which was very cute. Which royal would you like to have at your birthday party, Katie?
Probably the Queen, because I think she'd be good fun.
Oh, yeah. I think that's good.
What? Who's living or?
Oh, you mean Queen Camilla, right?
Yeah, of course.
Yes, she seems lots of fun. I think living. We'll keep it to living.
No.
Who are you going? Okay, who are you going to have?
I was going to have Prince Philip, I think, because I enjoyed his. Every time I met him, he was always funny in a sort of slightly abusive way. But no, I think living, probably the King. I think.
All right, we'll invite the King and Queen to the joint birthday. As we discussed earlier, Kate was with ex-England manager Gareth Southgate this week. Which royal do you think would make the best football manager?
William, definitely.
Gotta be William, right? Yeah.
He'd be a great football manager.
Maybe George down the line too. You could
He'd
think
take
of getting
England
right
to the final of the World Cup and we'd win if William was manager, right? Rob?
Well, I don't know about that. But,
He might select too many Aston Villa players. That's the problem.
I think William. Yeah.
If you had the opportunity to work with a royal on their autobiography, who would you choose?
That's a good one.
And of course, you've both written a lot of books, but if we're going to bring one in on the project closely.
Oh, I don't know. It's a tough one. I think I'd probably want William, but he'd have to answer every question absolutely truthfully.
Yes. Yeah, that's the dream.
Yeah.
I think the King again, because of the sheer amount of just the weight of history that's been involved in his time on Earth. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, both of you, for your time. It's been fascinating as always. That's all we have time for on this week's Royal Exclusive. Thanks so much for watching. Please leave your comments as usual and remember to subscribe to us here on our new Royal Exclusive YouTube channel for the latest royal news. See you next week.